pleased to welcome you this evening. It's especially gratifying when two organizations I am so passionate about partner. The museum is dedicated to teaching the history of the Holocaust and advancing human rights to combat prejudice, hatred, and indifference. AJC is a leading global Jewish advocacy organization that works to enhance the well-being of the Jewish people and advance human rights and democratic values in the US and around the world. As part of my AJC involvement, I co-chair the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council, and I'd like to welcome my co-chair, Mohammed El-Bieri, who is with us this evening, along with several other members of the council. AJC's Community of Conscience Coalition is the co-convener with the Holocaust and Human Rights Museum for tonight's program. Made up of diverse voices from local civic, religious, and ethnic leaders, the Community of Conscience seeks to advance our common values of pluralism, mutual respect, and civil discourse. Values I hope we can all agree should be elevated and enhanced during these trying times. Among the numerous coalition members that have joined us tonight are museum CEO Mary Pat Higgins and Liz Cedillo Pereira, Chief Equity Officer for the City of Dallas. I'd also like to recognize a few elected officials or their designates. With us tonight are Congressman-elect Pete Sessions and staff members representing Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson and Congresswoman-elect Beth Van Dyne, as well as a staff representative, State Representative Ana Maria Ramos. Please note that both AJC and the museum are nonpartisan 501c3 organizations that neither endorse nor oppose political candidates. Finally, it is my pleasure to recognize Edurne Pineda, Deputy Consul of Mexico. Thank you for joining us this evening and for your friendship and strong partnership. One final bit of housekeeping. If you have questions for our speakers, please email them to dallas@ajc.org. I'll repeat that, dallas@ajc.org. With that, I will invite Dr. Charlotte DeCoster, Director of Education for the museum, to begin our program. She will be followed by AJC Dallas Regional Director, Joel Schwitzer.
Thank you, Mark. Dr. Abosh Jacobson, our Chief Education Officer at the museum, had planned to participate in tonight's program, but she had a death in her family and is unable to be with us tonight. As a historian in Jewish history, she is our in-house expert on anti-Semitism and its history. As a historian of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, I would like to introduce anti-Semitism from the perspective of a museum educator and what role it plays in educating students and the public. When students and the general public visit the museum, they often have little to no understanding what anti-Semitism is. They usually only connect it to Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, but not beyond it. To them, the Nazis are similar to aliens that arrived in Germany in 1933 and brought anti-Semitism, and then left in 1945 and took anti-Semitism with them. A focal part of the orientation in our museum is to introduce visitors before they enter the Holocaust Shoah wing of the exhibition to the history of anti-Semitism, from its roots in anti-Judaism centuries ago to modern anti-Semitism. In the exhibition, we highlight not just anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany, but also a wider European and American anti-Semitism. For instance, students are always surprised to learn about Henry Ford and the Dearborn Independent, his anti-Semitic newspapers. They have very little understanding of anti-Semitism even in American history. Similar, in professional development with educators, I always tell teachers that they cannot start their lesson unit in 1933 when teaching the Holocaust, but must instead start centuries before with a brief historical introduction from the Exodus out of Egypt, accusations of deicide during medieval times, and birth of racial anti-Semitism in modern times. If students don't understand the history of anti-Semitism, they will never fully understand the scope of the Holocaust. To help educators, Dr. Abosh Jacobson gives a short lecture on the history of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism at most of our teacher workshops. It is key to what we teach to teachers. For most educators, this historical information is totally new. I'm always surprised at how much they learn from her. Usually her lecture is followed by an in-depth discussion and questions from the teachers on anti-Semitism, its history, and even today. Many of them continue to ask her questions, and some even include their own biases and misconceptions. Results from surveys like the AJC State of Antisemitism in America report reinforce the lack of understanding of anti-Semitism. It highlights the need for Holocaust education centers and museums like the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum to teach this history and share the roots of anti-Semitism with the general public. We appreciate the opportunity to partner with the AJC on a program like tonight's to continue this learning. Now, I would like to turn it over to Joel Schwitzer, Regional Director of the AJC Dallas, to present the findings of the report.
Thank you, Charlotte, Mark, and everyone who's joined us tonight. We're always so pleased to partner with the Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, really a first-class, world-class museum teaching the Holocaust and human rights and genocide in our community, lessons that are as relevant now as ever. So thank you all for joining us today to learn about AJC's 2020 report on the state of anti-Semitism in America. This landmark report follows AJC's groundbreaking 2019 survey, and for the first time, bear with me, I'm sorry. And for the first time, gauges opinions of the general public in addition to American Jews. The massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in October 2 years ago was a wake-up call for American Jews to rising levels of anti-Semitism. Last year, in order to ascertain how American Jews were feeling, we released our first survey on American Jews' attitudes on anti-Semitism. But questions remained. Was Pittsburgh a wake-up call for all Americans? What does the general public think about anti-Semitism? Are they aware of the increase, and do they even know what anti-Semitism is? We wanted to be able to take a look at both how American Jews were feeling about anti-Semitism in America, simultaneously with what the US general public felt, and the result was this one-of-a-kind report. Before we dive into the results, I'd like to start a little bit with the methodology we used, because it was extremely important that we could be very confident in the survey findings. So we contracted with the research firm SRSS, which is a reputable public opinion research firm that's been used by CNN, Pew, ESPN, among others. SSRS conducted phone interviews with 1,334 Jewish Americans over the age of 18 with a 4.2% margin of error. We were told that a 500-person sample size would be adequate, but we really wanted to be well beyond adequate, and so surveyed this unprecedented size sample of American Jews. In fact, this sample size constitutes the largest, most comprehensive Jewish organizational polling of Jewish Americans in history. For the parallel survey, SSRS spoke to 1,010 adults from the general public by phone with a 3.7% margin of error. These surveys that provide insights into attitudes and perceptions of anti-Semitism for both American Jews and the general public will assist AJC in our data-driven advocacy, while also laying the groundwork for us to follow trend lines across multiple years. One goal tonight will be to present the findings in a way that isn't completely frontal. So Amy, put up the first poll, please. So we're going to make it a little interactive by asking you some of the same questions that were posed to survey respondents, and then compare your responses with the findings. So please, you should see a poll in front of you. How much of a problem, if at all, do you think anti-Semitism is in the United States today? We'll take a little bit to give you all a chance to answer. give it about another 2 seconds. And we'll share the results. So it looks like we had 70% of respondents say that it's a very serious problem. We had 26% say somewhat, 4% not much of a problem, and none of you said that it's not a problem at all. Let's see how that compares. So in our survey of American Jews, the bottom line is American Jews are concerned about anti-Semitism. 88%, nearly 9 in 10 American Jews believe that anti-Semitism is a problem today. Over 1/3 believe it's a serious problem, while over half say it's somewhat of a problem. It's interesting, we kind of flip-flopped that a little bit. And again, this is not a random sample because these are people who self-identified to attend a program on the state of anti-Semitism. And it's also not strictly a Jewish crowd, so we'll get some variances there as well. And we found in our, the numbers were pretty much flip-flopped, with 70% saying it's a serious problem and 26% somewhat of a problem. We'll be looking at numbers from the general community soon and making more comparisons. However, as I said, we should not be surprised if many of our answers diverge from the SSRS findings. Next question, please, Amy. We asked, over the past 5 years, do you think anti-Semitism in the United States has increased a lot, increased somewhat, stayed the same, decreased a little, or decreased a lot? We'll go about another 5 seconds. And let's close the poll. We found that 67% think it's increased a lot, 30% somewhat, 2% stayed the same over the last 5 years, and none think it decreased to any extent. And then comparing that to what we found among American Jews, 82% of American Jews believe anti-Semitism has increased over the past 5 years, with 43% saying a lot and 39% saying somewhat. And there was a little bit of difference with 67% saying it increased a lot and 30% saying somewhat, but not too far off track with what the national survey found. Over 1/3 of American Jews, 37%, have been the target of anti-Semitism either online or offline over the past 5 years. That high number reveals that more needs to be done to combat anti-Semitism in America. Of the American Jews who experienced an anti-Semitic incident, more than 3/4, 76%, did not report it. 3 out of 4 people who experienced an anti-Semitic incident did not report. One reason they don't report is because they will believe nothing will change, which we call resignation in fighting anti-Semitism. Some because they feel like it's not serious enough due to normalization of anti-Semitism. And we need to change this. We need to ensure that law enforcement understands all forms of anti-Semitism and takes it seriously. Data about anti-Semitic incidents must be collected and appropriately reported. We cannot effectively combat the problem if we don't know the true scope of it. Jews should feel anti-Semitism is taken seriously and report it when they experience it. The Higher Jabara No Hate Act aims to provide resources to adequately track hate crimes in all 50 states and is a critical component in improving hate crime reporting by enhancing training, community relations, provide resources for tracking and reporting, as well as assistance and support for hate crime victims. Earlier this year, The House integrated this bill into the HEROES Act, which it subsequently passed. Last week, the US added the No Hate Act to the companion bill. AJC is advocating for the Senate to call for a vote and pass this legislation before the end of the year. Texas actually has a particularly poor track record when it comes to hate crime reporting. On an annual basis, the FBI releases data on hate crimes through its Uniform Crime Report. In 2018, there were 85 US cities with a population greater than 100,000 that either reported 0 hate crimes or simply did not report to the FBI. A disproportionate number, nearly 20% of these cities, are in Texas, including Plano, Richardson, Allen, Irving, and McKinney. The DFW Muslim Jewish Advisory Council has met with municipal leadership in the area to urge them to take steps to ensure accurate reporting of hate crimes, even as we advocate on a federal level for legislation like the No Hate Act. The 2019 numbers were released just prior to Thanksgiving, and there was some encouraging news. The number of cities of that size on the list dropped from 85 to 71, a significant decrease. However, Texas is still home to a disproportionate number of those cities, but it has gotten closer to 1 in 6. So there's been some improvement there, and Richardson and McKinney are no longer on that list. But it is important to note that even in jurisdictions where hate crimes are reported, they are almost certainly being underreported. The perception that anti-Semitism is increasing, which over 4 in 5 American Jews believe, is supported by the data. According to the FBI's hate crime report, anti-Jewish offenses, incidents, and victims of hate crimes all increased from 2018 to 2019. There were 1,032 Jewish victims of hate crimes in 2019, compared to 920 in 2018. Anti-Jewish incidents rose to 953 in 2019, a 14% increase from 835 the previous year. Overall, while Jews represent less than 2% of the US population, they are the target of more than 60% of religiously based hate crimes, with an increase of 14% over the previous year. The annual FBI report only shows a partial scope of hate crimes in America because it depends on voluntary submissions of data from local law enforcement agencies. The No Hate Act mentioned earlier would make reporting to the FBI mandatory. AJC released a statement on the FBI data, which we'll send a link to in our post-event email tomorrow. Let's go ahead and put up the next poll. Jewish community members were asked the following question. Over the past 2 years, have you avoided publicly wearing, carrying, or displaying things that might help people identify you as a Jew? We found among our group tonight that 37% of you said yes. You have avoided publicly wearing, carrying, or displaying things that might visibly identify you as Jewish. Let's see what we found in the general public. We actually were a little higher here. In our audience tonight, 37% of respondents reported avoiding displaying their Judaism in public. Our survey showed that nationwide, 1 in 4 American Jews have avoided publicly wearing or displaying things that identify them as a Jew. Furthermore, almost 1 in 3 Jewish Americans have avoided certain places or situations out of fear for their comfort or safety as a Jew. And for me, this resonates from times earlier in my Jewish communal career. I've been a Hillel director in various settings, and at one point early in my career, I was responsible for staffing birthright trips through Hillel for UNT and other area schools. And it was always really exciting for me when we would take these young kids to Israel and they would come back and they would start wearing kippot or Stars of David and start to visibly show their Judaism. And I will never forget being at a Hillel meeting at the Flying Tomato in Denton and having one of our students say, you know, I don't feel comfortable. I went to Israel Day on the quad and people were protesting and I don't feel comfortable displaying this anymore. So these are real, you know, it is chilling when someone who was newly excited about their Jewish identity is now being made to feel like they can't express that identity and they can't publicly show it or they have to hide it. Next poll, please. So we mentioned earlier, we asked the question, do you ever avoid certain places, events, or situations out of concern for your safety or comfort as a Jew? And in this case, we came out a little bit below what we found. 18% of our respondents tonight avoided places, situations, or events. One of the significant aspects of this report was our ability to compare American Jewish responses between 2019 and 2020. Some data really was different. In answer to this question, for instance, in 2019, the answer was 1 in 4, 25% of American Jews responding in the affirmative. This year, the affirmative response was 31%, almost 1 in 3. This is a significant increase in just 1 year. For the first time, we also surveyed American Jews about their experiences of anti-Semitism online. We did this because when we really think about the future of anti-Semitism, we know that its digitization really is the biggest and farthest reaching battleground. So we felt we needed to establish a baseline of information about how American Jews are experiencing anti-Semitism online and on which platforms. What we found was that 1 in 5 American Jews have experienced an anti-Semitic remark online or on social media in the past 5 years. Of those, the vast majority of users experienced anti-Semitism on Facebook, followed by Twitter. 62% said they had been the targets of anti-Semitic remarks on Facebook. 1/3 said they'd experienced anti-Semitism on Twitter, 12% on Instagram, and 10% on YouTube's. You'll note the totals add up to more than 100 because respondents could select multiple entries. Furthermore, in the last 2 years, 24% of American Jews have avoided posting content online that would identify them as Jewish or reveal their views on Jewish issues. Now, one important thing as we look at these statistics, I need to remind everyone that survey respondents were all over the age of 18. As a parent of teens, I can tell you that anti-Semitism is much more prevalent on some of these platforms than the numbers in front of you might imply. It's just that people over 18 are much less likely to be using them. Anecdotally, I can tell you that my own daughter recently deleted her TikTok account because of what she saw as a persistent and pervasive issue with anti-Semitism. We are often told that the anti-Semitism on social media platforms must be reported in order for content moderators to do their jobs. However, across all social media platforms, almost half of American Jews, 46%, who experienced online anti-Semitism and reported it, said that no steps were taken to address or to remove their reported content. This number is far too high and speaks to the need to engage tech platforms and address the gaps in artificial intelligence, human moderators, and the implementation of platform policies and community standards. We also asked Jewish Americans about their views on the sources of anti-Semitism in America today. Nearly 9 in 10, 89%, said the extreme political right was a threat, with 49% saying it was a very serious threat. 85% said extremism falsely perpetrated in the name of Islam was a threat, with 27% saying it's a serious threat. 61% said the extreme political left was a threat, with 16% saying it's a very serious threat. Another significant finding is almost half of US adults have either never heard the term anti-Semitism or have heard it but do not know what it means. The very first question asked to US adults was, how familiar are you with the term anti-Semitism? We discovered that nearly half of US adults have either not heard the term anti-Semitism or have heard the term but don't know what it means. So at this point, before proceeding with the questions, the interviewer told everyone that anti-Semitism is hostility towards Jews so that they could complete the rest of the survey. But the lack of awareness shows us that work needs to be done to educate the general public about what anti-Semitism means, its contemporary forms, and why combating it is so important. Of those who had never heard the term before, 36% had a high school education or less. So education is critical here in our efforts to raise awareness. It was also significant to be able to compare the responses between American Jews and the US general public and to note this divergence. We asked both Jewish Americans and the general public about whether anti-Semitism is a problem in America today. As you'll recall from earlier, 88% of American Jews view anti-Semitism as a problem today, while only 3 in 5, or 63% of US adults in the general community agree. 1 in 3 US adults do not believe anti-Semitism is a problem today, compared to just 1 in 10 American Jews. As we can see, American adults are almost half as likely to believe anti-Semitism has risen in the past 5 years than Jewish Americans. 4 in 10 from the general US population versus 8 in 10 American Jews. Now, to be clear, the last 5 years includes the murders in Pittsburgh, Poway, Jersey City, Muncie, and numerous attacks against Jews in Brooklyn. As you saw in the FBI data earlier, as well as other sources demonstrate an increased number of incidents, but the majority of the general public does not perceive this increase. Despite the statistics, the majority of Americans do not believe anti-Semitism has increased in the last 5 years, and contrary to documented statistics, 14% of the general population believes that anti-Semitism has decreased. Next question, please. And for this one, there will actually be 3 questions that pop up. You may need to scroll down depending on the size of your window. We asked respondents for their opinions on several frequently heard anti-Semitic tropes. We'll give you just a few more seconds. We know the majority of American Jews believe that denying Israel's right to exist, a key tenet of anti-Zionism, is a form of anti-Semitism. But what about all Americans? What do they think? Do they agree? And we found, yes, they do. And this was a big finding for us. 3/4 of Americans, 74%, agree that the statement, Israel has no right to exist, is anti-Semitic, compared to 85% of American Jews. And in our audience tonight, we found that 94% of people agreed that that statement was anti-Semitic, as opposed to one who said it was not, and 4 who were not sure. This strong agreement among both the American Jewish and general populations strengthens our position of the need to understand new forms of anti-Semitism in America and supports our work in encouraging local, state, and federal governments to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA, working definition of anti-Semitism, which includes several examples of anti-Israel anti-Semitism. Now, when it comes to other anti-Semitic tropes, accusations of Jewish money or dual loyalty, the percentages were not as close. The general public is less likely to view the statements, the US government only supports Israel because of Jewish money, and American Jews are more loyal to Israel than to America, as anti-Semitic than American Jews. And that compares to our findings here tonight were more similar to the first statement. Again, this is not a truly random sample because it's people who self-selected to attend a presentation on anti-Semitism. So our numbers were pretty similar to those of our first question, the question, Israel has no right to exist. But in general, these findings speak to a lack of understanding among the general public about anti-Semitism being more than just a hatred of Jews or discrimination against them. Anti-Semitism is also this certain perception of Jews connected to accusations of power, control, or money. It is actually what makes anti-Semitism different from other forms of racism, which vilify their victims as being inferior. Anti-Semitism is unique because it perceives its target, Jews, as having too much privilege, too much power, and attacks them for that. Both the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, which includes conspiracy theories of Jewish control and charges of dual loyalty, and AJC's Translate Hate, which is an educational glossary of anti-Semitic terms and tropes, are useful tools in understanding all forms of anti-Semitism. The second edition of Translate Hate will be published in early 2021, but we will send a link to the current edition as a follow-up to this evening's program. We asked both American Jews and the general public about their opinions of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or BDS movement. We found that majorities of both groups view BDS as having at least some anti-Semitic supporters. In both surveys, fewer than 20% of respondents did not consider BDS to be anti-Semitic. Our last key takeaway is a concerning one. We found that 7 out of 10 Americans, 72%, said that if a Jewish person or organization considered a statement or idea to be anti-Semitic, it would either not make a difference or actually, in 7% of the cases, make them less likely to consider anti-Semitic. I'm going to repeat that. 7% of people in the general public said that if a Jewish person or organization considered a statement or idea to be anti-Semitic, it would make them less likely to consider it so. Now, for the group that said it would not make a difference, perhaps some of them may already know what anti-Semitism is and would agree with the Jewish community, but maybe they do not. In any case, if there is a question about whether or not something is anti-Semitic, the Jewish community is the arbiter. We want to ensure that Jews can define the persecution against them. This is especially important because the Jewish community knows anti-Semitism is more than a hatred of Jews. It is also a certain perception connected to an alleged evil in the world and to harmful conspiracy theories of power and control. This is what makes it different from other forms of hate and bigotry. In the same way we listen to the African American community to explain anti-Black racism, to the Muslim community to define Islamophobia, or to the LGBTQ+ community when they point out homophobia and transphobia, Jews' perception of anti-Semitism should be listened to when determining whether or not something is anti-Semitic. And I want to talk a little bit about a campus that's not in our state, but is near and dear to my heart, and that's the University of Illinois, where I served for 7 years as the Hillel director. In October of last year, the student government passed a resolution 29-4 that defined anti-Semitism, that separated it from anti-Zionism, which, as we just learned, 85% of Jews and 74% of the general community would agree the statement that to be anti-Zionist is to be anti-Semitic. They held this vote 29-4. No Jewish campus organizations were consulted in this definition. Despite over 400 Jewish students showing up to protest, it passed overwhelmingly. Max Shapiro, a former student senator, during the public comment section of the evening said, "Passing this resolution is an explicit message from the community leaders at the University of Illinois that Jews on this campus do not have the right to define what hatred against them is." And this is what our college students on some of our campuses are dealing with today. Next slide, next poll, please, Amy. We finally, since this is in conjunction with the Holocaust Museum, I think this last one is appropriate. How important do you think it is for schools to teach middle and high school students the history of the Holocaust? Not surprisingly for this audience, 100% said it was very important. So that's good for Mary Pat and all of our friends at the museum. Almost 1 in 4 Americans, 24%, report knowing little to nothing about the Holocaust. This data point reflects what we've seen from other Jewish organizational surveys about American knowledge about the Holocaust in recent years. However, 76% say they know some or a lot about the Holocaust, so it depends on whether you're a glass full or a glass half empty kind of person. The vast majority of American Jews, 99%, know some or a lot about the Holocaust. 84% say they know a lot, with 15% saying they know something. However, it's not just Jews that support Holocaust education. The general public does as well. For both Jewish Americans and the general public, Holocaust education matters. 99% of Jewish Americans and 90% of the general public said that it was important to teach about the Holocaust to middle and high school students. For Jewish Americans, 91% said it was very important, and 8% said somewhat important. For the general public, 68% said very important, and 22% said it was somewhat important. This is an excellent data point to support universal Holocaust education. Last year, Congress passed the Never Again Holocaust Education Act, which mandates that the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum makes educational materials available. However, it is up to the states to ensure that material is used. We are so fortunate to have a world-class institution like the Holocaust and Human Rights Museum in Dallas that educates thousands of young people from miles around each year, many who may live in areas in which they may have never even met a Jew. We need to ensure that Holocaust is taught in the schools, to explain to students that unfortunately anti-Semitism did not end with the Holocaust, and why it is necessary to continue to fight it today. So what can you do to combat anti-Semitism? Here are a few steps you can take. Educate yourself. Use and support the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism. Use and promote AJCs Translate Hate. Speak out and be an ally. make public statements, participate in coalitions, restore civility to public discourse. Advocate, support measures that help reporting and prosecution of hate crimes, and advocate for Holocaust education in schools, and help provide support and resources for community security and awareness needs. This has been a snapshot of the complete findings. AJC's anti-Semitism report contains more information about anti-Semitism in US political parties, Jewish institutional security, and more. To view each survey in full, as well as a comparison of the results, please visit ajc.org/2020report. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to unshare my screen and be happy to take a few questions. You can email any questions to dallas@ajc.org.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Joel. That was a great presentation. I've heard it several times, and every time I have to say I learned something new. So thank you for doing that. Also, just another quick thank you to the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, Charlotte DeCoster for joining us, Mary Pat Higgins, of course, and Annie Black, and our very own Mark Zilberman, who represents both organizations. One of the first questions we have is from Annie, a community member, wondering what the next steps are for this AJC report. What are the actionable items? I know one of those last slides, it talks about what you can do next, but what are the plans that AJC has moving forward to push out this survey?
Well, I think that's actually two slightly different questions. So to push out the survey, it is finding different venues, meeting with everyone from city council members to legislative staffs to school groups to youth groups, and not just to people like our audience tonight who are already very familiar with anti-Semitism and like-minded of it, but to really get it before as many people as possible to open some eyes and to really help make others aware of the issue. But in terms of an advocacy priority, because we are an advocacy organization at the end of the day, it is really about working to advocate for the No Hate Act to make sure that we have the ability to track hate crimes, and this will help not just fight anti-Semitism, but Islamophobia, bigoted attacks against the Black community, the Asian community, which we certainly saw an uptick in the beginning of the pandemic. So that's a critical piece of advocacy that we're engaged in currently. And then the adoption of the IRA definition by local, state, federal governments. So we're advocating around the world on the IRA definition. So even as recently as last month, there have been new countries. I think Spain may have been the latest to adopt it. I could be mistaken, but just last month there were a couple of new countries that came forward and adopted it. Here in Texas, we have a new legislative session coming up in 2021. Our Dallas and Houston offices have already been working with the governor and with the legislature on this. The governor actually brought up to us that he'd like to see this passed and adopted by the state of Texas in the 21 session. So there are real actionable advocacy items that we would love help from people on. So, it's nice to come to an event like this and hear a presentation, but you can also you can also assist in the actual hands-on advocacy, and you can email me at dallas@ajc.org to learn more about those opportunities.
Yes, again, you beat me to that plug to please reach out to the Dallas office of AJC. We would be happy to work with groups that are perhaps represented on this call to share the report further out. And again, as a reminder, if you have any questions that you would like Joel to address, please also email that right now to dallas@ajc.org. So this program is co-convened by AJC, specifically our community of conscience, which brings together a very diverse group representing the Dallas area, as well as the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. I'd love for you to speak a little bit to why anti-Semitism matters to people outside of the Jewish faith and why it is important to share this information, not just with Jews, but the greater population.
Thank you. Well, certainly we know from history that normalization of anti-Semitism within a society never portends well for a vibrant democracy. And I think then Prime Minister Manuel Valls of France definitely knew that when he said after the 2015 hypermarché attacks that France without its Jews would not be France. And that continues a tradition that goes back to George Washington, who in his 1790 letter to the Jewish community of Rhode Island said that he would give bigotry no sanction and persecution no assistance. So if the father of our country clearly saw that the protection of its Jewish community was fundamental to the American ideal. And we've found in advocacy organizations like AJC that if equal rights can't truly be ensured for us unless they're ensured for all. And so that's why coalition building is so important. That's why we have that dual mission. So AJC's mission, which I know you know well, Amy, is to enhance the well-being of the Jewish people and to advance human rights and democratic values in the United States and around the world. And it's that idea that in advancing human rights and democratic values, we are also ensuring our own equal rights and protection. And that's why we're committed to coalition work, so that we're not just standing by ourselves against anti-Semitism, but we're standing arm in arm with our friends from multiple communities, be they Muslim, Latino, Black, Asian, LGBTQ+, and others, to learn from one another, to share our narratives, to share our aspirations, and in the process to be better allies for others and to strengthen others' ability to stand for us. And that's really at the core of why we created the community of conscience.
Absolutely. It reminds me of that often quoted Martin Luther King Jr. quote of injustice anywhere is a threat. And injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So again, the importance of working together and coalition building is so great. We did just receive another question. So again, please feel free to send them via email to dallas@ajc.org. Joel, could you review a little bit more about the Texas cities, including Plano and Irving, and expand on the No Hate Act and those that have not reported? I believe our participant would just like a little bit more clarification on what that meant, that we had so many cities in Texas that did not report a hate crime and what those implications are.
Sure, and I want to draw a distinction. There are some of those cities that don't report at all, and there are some that report zero. In Texas, it is the case that they are all reporting zeros. They're just saying, nope, no FBI, no hate crimes happening here. In 2019, those Texas cities were Plano, Irving, Grand Prairie, Brownsville, Kylene, Midland, McAllen, Round Rock, Sugarland, Allen, San Angelo, and Edinburgh. And so those are only cities of 100,000 or more. I think we have at least one person from Oklahoma in the audience tonight, so I'll add to that Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, which has just over 100,000 people at 110,000, and also has reported zero. And so the No Hate Act, what that would do is it would not only provide more resources for educating both police officers, law enforcement, as well as community as to what a hate crime is, and help with tracking and enforcement, but it would convert that reporting from being optional to being mandatory. So it would provide training to make the reporting more accurate, and it would make that reporting mandatory as well.
And thank you for making that clarification and distinction between reporting none and reporting zero. It really is astounding to have either of those options. It appears that at this time, we do not have any other questions. Joel, I don't know if you wanted to make any other wrap-up remarks, but again, I wanted to thank everyone for sharing with us their Wednesday evening. And of course, a huge thank you to the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, which is always a wonderful partner to work with many of our shared missions. If you would like to access the report, please go to the AJC website. So ajc.org/2020 report. And you can see in greater detail all the results as well as the comparisons. We always encourage you to follow our AJC Dallas Facebook page for upcoming programming and happenings. And please reach out to Joel or myself at dallas@ajc.org if you are interested in any additional information. Again, thank you all for being with us this evening. And yeah, thank you. Take care.